Thank you, Special Coordinator, for your briefing. I now give the floor to Observer State of Palestine, His Excellency Mr. Al-Malki, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates. Please.
Mr. President, allow me to thank China for convening this important meeting and for being represented at ministerial level, as well as Tunisia for their relentless efforts within this council, and my Arab brothers who decided to participate in this meeting as an integral part of their efforts to end aggression against our people, land, and holy sites. Allow me also to thank the Secretary General for his participation and ongoing efforts, together with the UN Special Coordinator, to end this latest aggression against our people. I do acknowledge the presence of the foreign ministers of the Kingdom of Norway and the Republic of Ireland and the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation. Mr. President, there are no words that can describe the horrors our people are enduring. Baby Omar al-Hadidi came to life only 5 months ago and will now have to go through life without his mother and brothers Osama, 6 years old, Abdurrahman, 8, Suhaib, 14, all killed by an Israeli airstrike. His family is not the only one. Members of the family Abu Hatab were killed, including Ala, 5 years old, Bilal, 10, Yusuf, 11, and the family Al-Tanani.
إخوان السلام عليكم، أهلا وسهلا، تبارك الله عليكم كاملين.
With her husband and sons, Ismail, 6 years old, Amir, 5, Adham, 4, Muhammad, 3. Few hours ago, 15 members of the family Al-Qulaq were killed, including Zaid, 8 years old, Adam, 3, and Qusay, 1 year old, and their parents. Aziz survived, he is 10. Israel is killing Palestinians in Gaza, one family at a time. Israel is trying to uproot Palestinians from Jerusalem, expelling families, one home, one neighborhood at a time. Israel is persecuting our people, committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Some may not want to use these words, war crimes and crimes against humanity, but they know they are true. Israel is unapologetic and relentless in pursuing its colonial policies. We are therefore left with two questions. The first one is, what are the Palestinian people entitled to do to resist such policies and defend themselves? The following questions hold the answer. Is violence when committed by Palestinians terrorism, and when committed by Israel self-defense? Who will be arrested, the settlers or those resisting their presence and assaults? Will our peaceful protesters enjoy international protection or be left to face Israeli bullets and slander? Will we receive support for investigations by the ICC, or will some search for reasons to object, shielding war criminals and depriving Palestinian victims from any avenue for justice? Will products of Israeli settlements be banned, or will those who call for boycott be prosecuted? What are we entitled to do apart from hoping that one day Israel will be ready to end its occupation on its own and to negotiate peace? The second question is, what are the tools the international community is ready to deploy to ensure compliance by Israel with its obligations and an end of its occupation? tools it uses regularly in other conflicts. Military interventions, sanctions, maybe, suspending bilateral relations, maybe, prosecuting perpetrators of crimes, maybe, deploying protection forces, maybe, imposing an arms embargo, maybe, or will it rely simply on the possibility of convincing the occupying power to end its colonial occupation, while history has proven that Israel is not willing to listen? Mr. President, Israel keeps doing the same things, expecting a different result. Did it believe that its troops storming the holiest of sites, Al-Aqsa Mosque, on the holiest of months, Ramadan, and on the holiest of nights, the night of destiny, would bear no consequences? Did it believe Palestinians would accept to live in enclaves and wait for the Israeli settlers to seize the next house? Did they expect Palestinians to coexist with the occupation, its walls, its blockades, its settlements, and its prisons? There is no people on earth that would tolerate this reality. No people on earth. Israel keeps telling you, put yourself in our shoes. This is what they say all the time. Put yourself in our shoes. But Israel is not wearing shoes. It is wearing military boots. It is an occupying and a colonial power. Any assessment of the situation that fails to take into account this fundamental fact is biased, discredited, and unjust. We are not two neighbors living side by side in peace. Israel is the armed thief who has entered our house and is terrorizing our family. It destroys our homes, oppresses our people, generation after generation, decades after decades, and then claims a right to security that it denies us. Why don't you put yourself on our shoes? What would you do if your country was occupied, your people persecuted, besieged, massacred? Better yet, what did you do to achieve your independence and end the oppression of your people? We made a different choice to pursue a peaceful path to freedom, and it is in everybody's interest for that path to be successful. But that will not happen without ensuring that Israel bears the cost of occupation instead of reaping its benefits. Mr. President, how many Palestinian civilians killed is enough for a condemnation? We know a single Israeli is, but how many Palestinians? 200 Palestinians have been killed, a third of them children and women. What is the threshold for outrage? An entire family wiped out of existence is not enough. Dozens of families killed is not enough. Residential buildings brought to the ground and tens of thousands of Palestinians displaced for the fourth or fifth time is not enough. All this in the midst of a pandemic. Israel is not only an occupying power. Israel is a nuclear power. It has a military arsenal, the Iron Dome, shelters, while our people in Gaza are besieged, trapped, with nowhere to go and no safe haven. Even the UNRWA schools within which they shelter are vulnerable to Israeli attacks. It is Palestinian civilians who need protection. They deserve compassion. they deserve solidarity and action. The Palestinian people have risen everywhere because they are victims everywhere. Victims of dispossession, forced displacement, discrimination and denial of rights on both sides of the Green Line and in exile. When hearing Israeli officials speak, one could wonder how horrible it must be for them to live under our occupation. With our forces deployed in their streets and our settlers terrorizing their people and taking over their land and homes, and with millions of them under blockade. As many colonial powers before it, Israel holds its victims responsible for their own death. Israel is the victim forced to kill the Palestinians because they do not behave. If only Palestinians could coexist with their occupiers and oppressor in peace. Some wonder why Palestine enjoys so much solidarity and support from so many nations around the world. And the reason is that these nations are informed by their own history, their own struggle for freedom, and they know oppression when they see it. The countries who sit in these United Nations would be dishonoring the memory of those who fought for freedom in their respective countries if they were to accept colonialism and apartheid in Palestine. Mr. President, where are they, those who proclaimed they had achieved peace in the Middle East by brokering agreements between countries who were actually not at war? Where are they, those who proclaimed that peace in the Middle East could be achieved without the Palestinians and at their expense? Where are they, those real estate agents who decided they could sell what they do not own to those who have no rightful claim? We told them then, and we say now, Jerusalem is not for sale. Our roots are deep, our history long, our heritage etched in every stone, in every street and alley in this city. War and peace start from Jerusalem. You want to save peace? Start by saving Sheikh Jarrah. Protect Al-Haram Sharif from attempts to divide it temporarily and spatially. Israel continues proclaiming that Jerusalem is a unified capital of Israel. Have you ever seen the city more divided? The international consensus you have all helped shape and defend is being destroyed in front of our very eyes. The alternative that Israel chose is apartheid. Yes, apartheid. And one day soon, even this council will not be able to deny this reality. Act now to end the aggression and the assault on our people, our homes, our land. Act now so freedom can prevail, not apartheid. Mr. President, as the Palestinian people mark the 73rd anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe, Israel pursues the same policies of dispossession, forced displacement, discrimination and denial of Palestinian rights. Israel may believe it is winning, but it is nowhere closer to defeating the Palestinian people. Our people will never surrender or forgo their rights. Palestinian freedom is the only path to peace. Since peace is the responsibility of this council, your council, helping achieve Palestinian freedom is its legal and moral duty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Nadine Awad, a 16-year-old girl, an Arab citizen of Israel. She was studying biology and chemistry, and she dreamed of changing the world. She was murdered last Wednesday by the radical jihadi terrorist group Hamas. A Hamas rocket slammed into her home in central Israel, killing her and her father. Over the last week, millions of Israeli children, women, and men have been huddling in bomb shelters, while thousands of Hamas rockets landed all around them. Hamas has murdered 10 people in Israel, Jews and Arabs, and hundreds of its rockets have fallen short upon the people of Gaza itself, killing Palestinian children and destroying Palestinian homes. Hamas is carrying out its terror attacks while hiding behind Palestinian houses, schools, and hospitals, deliberately using civilians as human shields. Just before I arrived here today, I called my elderly parents who live in the southern city of Ashkelon and have just 30 seconds to reach a bomb shelter each time Hamas attacks. Member of the Security Council, let me ask you, what would you do if thousands of terrorist rockets were being fired at your country, at your people, at your parents or children? How would you respond if an organization with a similar fanatic jihadist ideology as ISIS was bombing Beijing or Moscow or Dublin and shutting down the airports of Paris or Oslo or London? What would you expect the Security Council to do? Mr. President, this is not the first time that Hamas has indiscriminately fired deadly missiles at Israeli civilians while hiding behind Palestinian civilians. But this time, it's different. It was completely premeditated by Hamas in order to gain political power. It was all a part of their vicious plan. While Hamas seeks the destruction of the state of Israel, it's also vying to take power in the West Bank and to replace the Palestinian Authority. Hamas was frustrated last month when President Abbas postponed Palestinian elections after not holding them for 15 years. It looked for another way to seize power. So, unfortunately, it chose to escalate tensions in Jerusalem as a pretext to start this war. Suddenly, Hamas leader Mohammed Def, who has been silent for years, was threatening Israel would pay a heavy price if an Israeli court went ahead and ruled on a property dispute in Jerusalem. Now, let me be clear. Israel is a country of law with a robust and independent judiciary. As in any democracy, the Israeli government does not interfere with court proceedings. Everyone knows that. Buying into Hamas's political propaganda ploy to portray the massive, unprovoked rocket attacks as a result of the dispute in Sheikh Jarrah is not only wrong, it is dangerous. It sends a disturbing message. There is never an excuse to indiscriminately fire rockets at civilians. There is never a justification for terror. Do you really believe that this property dispute is what caused Hamas to launch these large-scale attacks on the people of Israel? So after threatening Israel over Sheikh Jarrah, Hamas's next move was to incite violence on the Temple Mount, the holiest site in the world for Jews and one of the holiest for Muslims. Palestinian extremists turned the Al-Aqsa Mosque into a site for stockpiling weapons and launched violent attacks with firebombs and rocks against Jewish worshippers and against the Israeli police. Here is a photo of the stones and other weapons which Palestinian rioters placed in Al-Aqsa, desecrating this holy site and endangering the safety of all worshippers. The Israeli police had no choice but to intervene to restore order and ensure that both Jewish and Muslim worshippers could pray in peace. Using non-lethal means, our police was able to disperse the violent riots without a single fatality. Without a single fatality. I doubt whether there are many police forces anywhere in the world that could have achieved such an outcome. I want to emphasize, Israel deeply cherishes freedom of religion. Every year, during Ramadan and throughout the year, hundreds of thousands of Muslims are free to pray at their holy site in peace. Even after these extremely violent riots, Israel remains committed to the status quo and to religious freedom for all. Here is another photo of Eid al-Fitr prayers from this past Thursday, showing tens of thousands of Muslims praying at Al-Aqsa. Do you really believe these peaceful prayers is what caused Hamas to launch this large-scale attack on the people of Israel? Israel will continue to uphold the rights of all believers to practice their religion in freedom and security in the holy city of Jerusalem. As opposed to Hamas, which did everything in its power to incite violence, Israel took all possible steps to de-escalate tensions in Jerusalem. In an extremely exceptional move, we made a request to the Supreme Court to delay its hearing on the Sheikh Jarrah case. We rerouted our annual Jerusalem Day Parade and even took the unprecedented, unthinkable step of preventing Jews from entering their holiest site, the Temple Mount, on our National Day of Celebration. Even today, on the eve of the Jewish festival of Shavuot, where we celebrate receiving the Torah, Jews were prevented from entering the site because of Palestinian terror. And how did Hamas respond to all our efforts to de-escalate? By firing rockets and missiles at Jerusalem, our capital city. This is how it started. It was all planned in advance. Mr. President, for years, Hamas has been using international aid not to help the people of Gaza, but to abuse them. It has built a vast web of underground terror tunnels which snake beneath playgrounds, maternity wards, and mosques with the clear strategic goal of increasing the number of Palestinian civilian casualties when Israel is forced to respond. It is not just Palestinians which Hamas uses as shields. As we have revealed, Hamas is hiding its terror infrastructure, such as intelligence stations and command headquarters in multi-story buildings, including those which house international media, citizens of your own countries. Israel has no choice but to stop these Hamas attacks wherever they are being launched, and it is Hamas who should be held accountable for the consequences. We thank the President of the United States, the administration, and the many other countries that support Israel's right to defend our citizens from this terror. Every time Hamas fires at Israeli civilians while hiding behind Gaza civilians, it is committing a double war crime. It doesn't care where its rockets hit, as long as there is destruction. It doesn't care who the victims are, as long as there are victims. Israel is responding to indiscriminate attacks with precision-targeted strikes against Hamas military targets. We take unparalleled steps to prevent civilian casualties. Not only do we strictly adhere to international law, we go beyond, making phone calls and sending text messages in order to make sure that everyone gets out beforehand. Tragically, at times, despite all our efforts, Hamas's use of human shields results in civilians getting hurt. As an Israeli, a Jew, a father of four, I am deeply pained by the death of every civilian, whether Israeli or Palestinian. But any attempt to compare Israel and Hamas is factually, legally, and morally wrong. Hamas targets civilians. Israel targets terrorists. Israel makes every effort to avoid civilian casualties. Hamas makes every effort to increase civilian casualties. Israel sees every